Hey, what's good, Limitless Nation? It's your boy, Coach Andy Riise, the mental fitness coach and room tilter with Limitless Minds. I'm so excited to be with you here today on Monday. Today is MindGym Monday, where we give you practical tips, tactics, processes, and procedures to help you train your brain and really make it limitless. I'm so excited. On the background here, on the ones and twos, we got the magical Mari who's making it all happen. She's the Wizard of Oz, making all this magic happen here too. But more importantly, I am thrilled to be joined by my man, Big Mike Energy. Let's go, baby. How you doing?
What's happening? Good to see you, Andy. Good to see you. Glad to be with you today, man. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm just trying to beat this heat we just talked about here in Texas, man. It's something, folks, when a man from Central Florida comes to Texas and says it's hot, man.
Yes.
But
Yes.
how's life in Florida treating you, brother?
It's good. It's good. Listen, as long as I got that golf and salt water, I'm always going to be happy and good. It's my happy place and my rest haven.
You got it, man. Too. Well, I know we're in our summer. How's your summer been so far, brother?
Pretty good. Kind of uneventful. Haven't taken too many vacations or trips. Just some local trips, like we were discussing. I went down to Dallas and spent some time with family. But it's been a low key summer. All good though.
No, well, I wish I could say it's low key because I have been running around like a chicken with his head cut off. I had 2 summer camps that I attended. In about the last 30 days, I think I've traveled 2,500 miles across 7 different states.
Wow.
We're mixing work with pleasure, so I'm finally home. Kids are starting school, and it's just great to be back in the rhythm here and to be joining you today. So
Yes.
today, let's get right into it, Mike. Right.
Let's
So
do it.
today we're talking about training our brain, right? Getting
Yep.
those reps and sets in, just like we talk about. Train your mind, just like we train our bodies, our team, our character, and our craft. What have you been working on? How have you been training your brain, and what's been on your mind?
Yeah. So just as we were kind of talking, in preparation for this, I am I think like you and like a lot of the room tilters, right? And a lot of the people that we talk about, we strive to really get better. And I've got habits, I've got routines that I do that I always feel comfortable with that I think are allowing me to continually get better. Um, but I started thinking, and what prompted this thought was I'm working with an athlete, and the athlete tells me that, hey, I'm doing all these things to work harder, but I'm not seeing the results. I'm not sure I'm getting better. So what I helped him do was really kind of deconstruct the things that he's working harder on, and
Hmm.
then try to identify, well, out of all of these things, what are the things that you can actually do better? And if you're doing these things better, then you're on your way to getting better. So then I had to take my own advice, right? And I had to evaluate and say, okay, well, what are the habits and routines that I rely on that I believe are getting me better, but are they really? And
Right.
the answer to that was, I'm probably reached a plateau at certain things. So the things that I'm trying to get better at, I'm simply trying to do better. And as long as I'm doing those things better, then I'm getting better.
Yeah, it's you bring up a great point about us walking the talk, right? And it's something that we strive for integrity, right? That we want to close that say-do gap as much as possible, right? We want to practice what we preach, but most importantly, we want to serve and guide other people to become the best version of themselves, and that's what today is all about. And
Mhm.
so for you specifically, today we're talking about motivation and discipline, and why those two things together are these magic ingredients that are
Yes.
the fuel that help us achieve more consistent, optimal performances, right? So that's what's been on my mind and what I'm working on too, right? Because
Mhm.
just like you, I've been on the road, a very unusual July for me, and now I'm kind of settling back in, and I want to get back in this consistent routine and really develop my performance habits. Not only professionally but personally, right? So to me, what's on my mind is this idea about, hey, what is motivation and what is discipline, and how can I make those two things work together to really fuel my own mental performances, right?
Mhm.
So we're gonna get into with some definitions here in a minute here, but I just want to dispel some myths out there, right?
Yes.
One of the things I talk about, one of my favorite ones, is this idea. So look, Jocko Willink, he's great. If he's your thing, that's cool, right?
Mhm.
He probably wouldn't make it as a room tilter. I'm just throwing that out there, right? He probably would just want to make the cut,
I'm gonna
right?
make the
Because he
cut.
doesn't know what we know, right? And he doesn't
Right.
do what we do, okay? But just because he's an influencer out there doesn't mean that he knows everything, and nor do we know everything as well, too, because we're always learning and growing, trying to get better. One of the things that he says, and actually, author James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, one of my favorite books, he actually says this too, and I think he got it wrong, believe it or not, is that discipline equals freedom. And what he's saying is that motivation is overrated because motivation is based on emotion. And if you really want to be successful and you really want to achieve peak performance, you
Mhm.
got to be disciplined. And so obviously, he's a military guy like me, right? So of course he's going to say that, right?
Right, right.
Wrong, right? Hey, it's not about one versus the other. It's bringing them together, right?
Yes.
That's what it's all about. And that's what we want to teach you about Limitless Minds. And oh, by the way, if you want to learn more, download that app. But let's break it down, Mike.
Let's
So,
break it
what
down.
is motivation? And then maybe you start with motivation, and I'll handle the discipline piece, right? So
Mhm.
from your perspective as a mental performance coach, you've been doing this a long time. You're a world class athlete. You worked with elite performers in all
Oh,
arenas for a long time, man. So what's motivation, brother?
Motivation, right? Well, we know there's two motivations, right? There's the external motivation and the intrinsic motivation. External, obviously, is all the things that are from the outside that can motivate an individual to want to perform better. Want is the key word, right?
Yeah, it
External
really,
motivation typically allows someone to want to perform better, right?
right?
Intrinsic motivation, right? That's that internal. That's that I've got something inside of me. I've identified what my why is. I know
Yep,
exactly my purpose, and you decide to move forward. And that is that internal motivation, that intrinsic motivation that keeps someone going to stay on a routine, to stay consistent. So, when we talk about motivation, we talk about those two. And
yep,
I think we would all agree that the intrinsic motivation is the one that really enables a person to get to the areas or hit the strides that they really want to, or the
yep.
goals, achievements. So,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's kind of like the internal and external factors, right? And the research based on DC and Ryan has suggests that internal motivation is based on three factors. And Mari, do you mind throwing up that
mhm.
slide for us there too? It's that ant model, right? So we have there's two different ways of looking at this. There's the car model, which is competency, autonomy, and relatedness. But this
Right.
is the ant model. This actually comes from James Clear, right? So he got this one right. So
Yep.
the first thing is, so this is amping up. How do you amp up your internal motivation to be able to not only get started, but then to be able to go the difference? Because you can use it for both, right? The first thing is autonomy, right? What's that all about, Mike?
Autonomy. Oh man, it's exactly what you've got here. It's having the ability on your own to make the decisions and choices in terms of what you want to do in terms of your performance and how you want to move forward.
Yeah, and then the second piece, the M is mastery. Like from your perspective, what's mastery all about?
I think mastery really is, from my perspective, is once you've done something just consistently over the course of time, and you failed at it, number one, but after you get through those trial and errors of failing and not succeeding, and you get to the point where you've got this really um, long history, so to speak, of succeeding and doing the things that you are trying to accomplish very, very well, then that's the mastery part, right? Where it's clockwork.
Yep.
It's just done so easily and so effortlessly that it's no longer even a thought. It almost becomes autonomous.
Yeah, so it's we're doing it without having to think about it. We're unconsciously competent at something because we mastered a skill so well, right? That's ultimately, it's weird. We're in this mental performance world, but ultimately we want our athletes and our performers to not think, right? We want them to do what they're designed to do, right? Then the
Yes.
last piece of the P and AMP is purpose, or your why. What's that all about, Mike?
Man, that purpose is the why. That's really having that true understanding as to the reason behind why you do something, or the reason behind why you're trying to achieve something. And it's usually, combined with a higher sense of purpose, right? What is
Yeah,
there some type of internal higher sense of purpose that an individual has that they're trying to achieve, whether it's to, utilize their family history or their family's success in certain things, and they
yeah,
want to carry on a legacy, right? So it's
right.
having that purpose and having that understanding of why you do something and how you're going to continue to move forward with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I refer to that's exactly what you're saying. It's kind of like the rudder of your boat, and the Japanese have this idea called ikigai. That's like your reason for being, like, and I call it big whys and little whys.
Mhm.
So that's if that's internal motivation, and the extrinsic motivation, which has short-term effects, but doesn't necessarily have the long-term sticking and staying power.
Right.
That's about carrots and sticks, right? And so, Mike, why do you think that when it comes to motivation, the carrots and the sticks, those incentives and rewards, they don't necessarily help us with what motivation is all about, and that's commitment for the long term.
Yeah, gosh, there's several reasons, right? I mean, one, if you haven't already, acquired the discipline, right,
Yep.
to move forward in your task, that carrot begins to no longer become intriguing or something that you're trying to go after,
Right.
and it can actually become a little bit of a distraction. So I think dangling the carrot and having that stick in front of you, or the carrot on the stick in front of you, and trying to move forward with it. If you don't have the discipline,
Yep.
then that dangling the carrot or
Yep.
that goal is void.
Yeah. So I think what we're saying here too is like, to commitment and is motivation is about commitment, right? But what discipline is about compliance. And I want to throw up a tweet that I put up here too, because that's really what I wanted to really boil this down for the clients that I work with. I want to, there's beauty and simplicity, folks, right? And so what is really motivation all about with the intrinsic and extrinsic factor? Well, it's about commitment, right? Which is one of the 4 C's of mental toughness that I teach. And what discipline is about, it's about control and compliance.
Mhm.
And so you need both of those in order to be successful both in the short term and the long run, if you want to be able to be consistent and perform at the upper range of your potential consistently over time, knowing that you're going to be probably inconsistent and that progress is not linear, right? And so discipline, when you think about it, this is coming from a military context, is really about habits and about habit formation, right? So we want to develop good habits that turn into routines, and those routines become automatic, so we do things that become a part of who we are. We don't have to think about it, right? So when you think about habits, like, let's break that down a little bit, Mike. So like, what's the difference between a habit and a routine?
Yeah, so the habit and the routines, right? So even when we were going through this, right, and I think you had actually had posted a really great piece about the idea of making your bed in the morning, and how
Yeah,
we've all
absolutely.
heard that story over and over again, and it's kind of
Yeah,
like, yeah, well, yeah, we've heard that, been there, done that, right?
right.
But the habit of making your bed is just so great. I mean, for all of the things that we already know, for all the
Yeah,
things that you mentioned, right? It allows you to start your day with an accomplishment. It
yeah,
allows you to feel good about something that you actually created and made.
right.
But the routine of that comes from, once you've got the habit and you're doing the habit day in and day out, the routine is, okay, well, what are the things that I've grown from this habit that have now become the routine? So the routine now becomes, I've started my day on the right foot. i've
Right.
made i've I've felt good about a decision that I've made, and
Right.
this becomes the routine is daily.
Yep.
Now I'm striving to continually do better, day
Right.
in and day out.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great breakdown too. I like to say that routines allow us to be able to funnel our attention and our energy, those most important resources that we have internal to us, to the right things at the right time for the right reasons, right?
Absolutely.
And there's some differences there between, we won't get into with rituals and all those other things too. That's for another topic, right? But fundamentally, we want to develop habits and really good routines that allow us to go from moving from unconsciously incompetent to skill level 4, which is becoming unconsciously competent at something. We don't have to think about it, just part of who we are because we've done it so much at a high level, right? And there could be good and bad habits as well, too, right? It's a really important point that Mike brought up too. And I'm going to use the making the bed thing. And I wrote an article. It's in LinkedIn. Be sure you follow Mike and I on social media as well too. And you can find more great content like this on the app. So
Yep,
download that sucker today. Got to keep getting those plugs in, right, Mike?
that's right.
Is that, hey, the big thing about, if you really want to get good at something, right, you have to have a good combination of commitment and compliance, right? A lot of people think because you're in the military, it's really easy to be a leader in the military. I just bark orders and I tell people what to do, right? Well, that's a bunch of Hollywood bull crap. Because let me tell you what, folks, if you want to influence other people towards, high and hard goals and to do something that's completely unnatural, which is to give their lives when they're making not a lot of money, but they have a good higher purpose. They're really fighting for somebody to their left and their right. So for me to be effective as a leader in the military, it wasn't necessarily about discipline. That was certainly important, right? We had to do the right things, show up with the right uniform, the right time, in the right place. But everything else after that was kind of more of an art than it is a science, right?
Mhm.
At the
Yeah.
end of the day, when bullets are flying, I'm in a firefight. I got to rely on the person to my left and right that they have my back and I have theirs, right? And that has less to do with discipline than it does have to do about commitment, right? Because I'm doing something completely unnatural that is against everything that my sensory awareness is telling me that I should be doing, right? So how do we get there, right? Is it through commitment or through compliance? Well, I think it's both, but I would argue to be effective as a leader in any endeavor, especially in today's VUCA world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, where
Mhm.
challenge, change, and adversity is the norm, then I think that we have to really focus a little bit more on the commitment side than on compliance. What do you think, Mike?
I would agree because you just gave a really great example, right? And if you're in a fire, I am not military, so appreciate your service, and I have a huge respect for those that have served and continue to serve. But your example was perfect in the sense that if you're in a firefight and you're relying on the person to your left, to your right, behind you, in front of you, you've got to know that they are committed, right?
Yeah,
To also protecting you as
right.
well. So that level of commitment has got to be super, super high, and it's got to be a strong tenet, I think, in anything that has to do with being in the military and being in a position where you're at battle.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also and I appreciate that, but I think it's also relevant that just when things get hard, right? Because hey, it's easy to be disciplined when things are going your way, right? And let's face it, our brains don't like to consume a lot of calories, right?
Right.
Another great example. I love to hear this from you. How you deal with this is how do you stay motivated and disciplined with just having healthy habits, right? You and I both train still, right? Physically, we're even though we're aging athletes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
With sweet haircuts, by the way. This is the standard, by the way, for all you room tilters who are listening in. This beautiful bald haircut that Mike and I are rocking. But some great examples like, hey, when my sleeping habits, my nutrition habits, and my physical training habits, when I'm at home, man, they're dialed, right? They are totally dialed. But what happens when we go on the road, right? And I deal a lot with this with athletes specifically who are going across time zones. They're on the road all the time, right? So like, hey, it's easy to be disciplined when things are going, but as soon as I leave the construct of my safe environment, what happens, right? It becomes really difficult. It goes from complicated to complex, right? So, Mike, what are some practice? Let's get into the practical application here, man. Like, so what are your tips and techniques? You can use that example or anything that's on your mind.
Yeah.
So how do we leverage both motivation and discipline to achieve more optimal performances personally and professionally?
So this is great because I just had this conversation with my son, right, like a week ago, and I explained exactly what you just said. He's like, Dad, how you doing with your exercise and your weight loss and everything? He's a collegiate track and field athlete. So
Cool.
I told him, I said, when I'm home, it's good. I said, but when I'm on the road, it becomes difficult. It becomes a
Yeah.
challenge, and I've really got to make sure that I can't just travel somewhere and then say, okay, now I've got to do what I need to do to eat right. I have to like literally plan that out ahead of time and say, here's when I'm going to eat, here's where I'm going to get my exercise in, et cetera, and not just leave it up to, oh, it's just part of my routine and my habits. I do it every day. And then I put myself in a different environment, expect the same thing to happen, and it doesn't. But it also goes to the motivation piece, right? Where it's now I'm receiving external motivation from my son, right? Putting me in check, saying, "Hey, what are you doing? Are you being my accountability buddy, so to speak, right? What are you
Right.
doing? Are you exercising? Are you
Yep.
working? What are you doing to make sure that you're keeping your diet in check while you're gone?" So I think there's a big piece of the external motivation can serve the discipline purposes. In
Yeah.
addition to that, Andy, I would also say that inspiration, right? Like when I speak to my son, that provides inspiration to me. So
Yep.
that inspiration then transitions into motivation as well, and it
Right.
can transition from an external motivating piece
Right.
now intrinsically motivating me as
Yeah.
well. So the inspiration piece is big. I
Oh,
think
for
that's
sure.
a something we should definitely hit on is we can find these different areas
Yep.
uh, for inspiration to remain motivated.
Yeah, and it's not just an emotional thing too, right? It could be a social accountability thing, like you just mentioned as well too. I want to hit on a few takeaways. I mean, that's a great example, Mike. Let's go to the comments here for a second, Mike. What's jumping out to you from our amazing folks who thank you so much for everyone who's joined us today. Callan, Guillermo, we
Mhm.
appreciate you. But what
Yeah.
jumps out to you in terms of their comments?
Guillermo has a good one here. He's saying, while internal motivation might be more consistent, external motivation needs to be consistently evolving for it to be effective. Absolutely agree with that. Key word there, evolving. It has to be continually evolving in order to, reach that level of consistency that we want. Kaylin also says, under pressure, we don't rise to the occasion. We fall to the level of our training. Excellent. I'm sure you can probably speak to that as well from a training standpoint within the military, where you
Yeah,
really, really, regardless of situations, you've got to rely on your training. So, any thoughts there?
Yeah, Callan, I like what you're saying, but I want to make a tweak to that too. We don't fall back on anything. We are enhanced and bolstered by that. It may seem like semantics, but that in actuality, and having been in a lot of high pressure situations, both in sports and the military, now working people with business and high performers, I will tell you, we're not falling back on anything, right? We're talking about what is optimizing us and enhancing us to be able to move us forward, right? And again, it's a combination of both those factors that are happening, right? Because my habits are
Mhm.
something that I don't allow me to be able to do things without having to think about it too, right? But in the long run, as I'm doing things over and over and over and over again, right? If I'm just doing them for compliance reasons or for other reasons other than me wanting them to do them, they're going to fall off, right?
Right.
So I have to have that autonomy, that mastery, and that purpose, because those things, and part of that's inspiration to really help me with that staying power, right? And then when I lose motivation, I'm having a bad day, how do I make it the best crappy day possible? That's now what I'm relying on my discipline. So you see
Absolutely.
why they're like water faucets here, right?
Yes.
And how they really you need to find the right combination, either one, depending what you're up against. And when it gets complex, you have more variables than you know what to do with, they're really muddy the waters. That's when you really need to find that right combination, right? So that's a great comment. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, and we could geek out forever about it, but we're not going to get there.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm stealing that one from me, Andy. That was a great analogy, right? Using the faucets. I mean, how many times do we turn on the hot water and the cold water, trying to find that right temperature,
this is the right thing, man.
just the right thing. So perfect.
Yeah,
Excellent.
and I think the other thing too, piece like is just to give us ourselves grace a little bit and be compassionate with ourselves. We're our own worst critic, and I think we talk about getting to neutral and taking the next best steps, right, Mike? I mean, and we are victims of that as well too, right? Because we have hold ourselves such a high standard, and we want to be consistent with our words and our deeds.
Mhm.
How can we be compassionate? So when we're inconsistent and we're not motivated and we're not disciplined, how can we learn from that, get to neutral, and move forward, Mike?
You know what? We gotta. I'm going to share some. I had a really great conversation with a really old friend, and he was explaining to me a situation where he failed miserably. Like, it was bad, and he says, "You know what? The funny thing is when my wife, confronted me about this, and she said, how are you so calm about this situation?" And he just said, "I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. I know what I've done in the past, and this was a this was a fluke. This was a mistake that shouldn't have happened, but
Yeah,
it's not going to define me. I'm going to recover from the mistake. I'm going to overcome, and I'm going to continue to move forward." And I think that's it right there. It's just really having that awareness of saying, I strive to be great. I might do a lot of things very, very well and be great at it, but at the end of the day, I'm human and I'm
yeah,
fallible and I'm going to make mistakes, and I've got to give myself the grace. Uh,
mm,
and luckily, in this case that I'm talking about with my particular friend, he also has the great support of his wife to say, you know what, you're absolutely right.
yeah,
You're human. You make
yep.
mistakes. This unfortunately was a bad mistake, but we're going to move forward.
Yeah, no, it's a great way of saying it too, right? It's about the process, not necessarily about perfection. It's about the process and making progress. It's not about perfection, right?
Right.
And so that's the great example too. So for the last 5 minutes here too, and DJ, thanks. Shout out to DJ. What's up, man? Inspiration
Always good.
transitions to motivation. Great point to how do you turn that? How do they work together? It's a great point. So I want to dot the I here. I just want to give like 5 practical bullet points for takeaways here, because again, this is about putting things into action, right? So number one, if you don't mind throwing this up here, Mari. Number one, let's look at our motivational systems. Let's look internal to ourselves first and foremost, right? So what's our amp level look like right now, right? And taking some time to be able to then inventory that, understand, hey, can I do things on my own accord? What's my level of skill right now, and what's my purpose? What's my why for doing that, right? And then specifically when it comes to a task, it could be something that's really big, and it could be something that's really mundane. Albert Chambliss talks about the mundanity of excellence. I recommend starting with something really, really small, right? And then when I'm done with it, so there's a before, during, and after to every performance. When I'm done with the performance, reflect back and look at it. Okay, what letter grade would I give myself? Or scale of 1 to 10, 10 being my best, 1 being my worst. Where am I at and why? And ask myself the critical question, how can I make it better next time, right? The second piece I wanted to hit on here is this idea about assessing and inventorying my discipline level, right? When it comes to compliance. What does my habit look like, right? And again, we're going to talk about that. If you want to check out jamesclear.com, great website. He talks about, the habit loop formation, and there's a process that goes into that. How do I make that habit loop more obvious, more attractive, more easy, more satisfying? So I'm consuming less calories, because if it consumes less calories, it's easier for me to do it. It's more likely to become a habit and a routine, like we talked about. Number 3, super important. Write it down. Write it down. The research is pretty clear in suggesting that when I write things down, it's not the point of like taking it and going back and reflecting back on it. You're committing it from short-term to long-term memory that allows you to then remember it when you need it the most, right? So write it down and go into the steps that allow it to go to be a habit, to a routine. And the more that I write it down, the more it's going to become the foremost of my mind. Number 4, get quality reps in. Get quality reps and sets in. The more you do, especially quality repetition, it's just like working out, just like, running. It's just like movement. It's just like a lift, doing the clean and jerk, or whether I'm doing, getting ready to go be able to do a bench press or do some other movement in the gym. The more I repeat at a high quality level to standard, the more I'm going to notice that it becomes part of who I am, not just what I do. And number 5, because no human is ever self-aware. Self-awareness is an illusion, 100% it is. I'm going to ask for feedback and then move it to feed forward, right? Yes. Since life is a team sport and no human is completely self-aware, we all have blind spots. So ask others, like Mike talked to you about, in life, use others to be able to then feed off of us so we can hold each other accountable, so we can get that boost of motivation, inspiration when we're not feeling it right now. And we can continue to do things consistently, because we're going to show up and show out, not just for ourselves, but for others, right?
Absolutely.
And when you ask for feedback, start with, hey, what can I do to get better, right? That's where it all begins, is asking those critical questions. So those are 5 of my key things that Mike and I recommend to be able to use: motivation and discipline to fuel your optimal performance. I know we're coming up on the top of the hour, Mike. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
This has been awesome, Andy. Those five points were perfect and on point. I've enjoyed it. Let's keep it moving, and we'll have to do this again really soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you everyone who showed up today and showed out. We appreciate it. MindGym Monday, it's all about giving you practical tips, tools, and processes so you can train your brain all. And we want you to continue to think big, go far. We'll see you in the arena.
We'll see you guys. Take care.